The political panel all-stars up shortly, whānau. But first, this week's 1-on-1 in 10 with New Zealand Herald columnist Dr. Matthew Hooton. Kia ora, comrade. Welcome to the show and thank you for being available to the Fourth Estate. Your democracy is grateful. Can he hear us? I'm getting the studio with confused looks. Somebody will push a button shortly. We'll have him any second now. We can see him, we just can't hear him. No? Yes? Pause with us, brothers and sisters, as we try to get Dr. Hooton on. He's very, very, very important and essential. Can we move on? Okay. That does seem... We can't get him? Guys, I'm just getting shrugs. Okay. Well, it looks like we may have to move on. Oh, that's just so disappointing. No, you can't stand in for a Matthew. That would be completely inappropriate. Okay, we're going to have to move on.
No.
Hello. Oh, for the love of Christ, there you are. Thank Jesus. Dr. Matthew Hooton. Dr. Hooton, between the two of us, we have generated enough columns question. Can you hear us? No, he can't hear us.
I can now.
Oh, okay, you can now, Dr. Hooton. Between the two of us, we have generated enough columns questioning the leadership of Christopher Marx Luxon to fill a library that gets attacked by Destiny Church. The Prime Minister has stated that Nicola Willis is the best finance minister New Zealand's ever going to have. Not the best right now, not the top 5 from the last 20 years, but the best of all time, including all future space-time until the second coming of Christ. According to the Prime Minister, Jesus Christ himself wouldn't be a better finance minister. Your thoughts?
Well, just on a technical point, the Prime Minister's comments were restricted to New Zealanders, New Zealand citizens, and Jesus Christ was not a New Zealand citizen. So I don't think the Prime Minister was making a negative comparison between Nicola Willis and his own personal saviour.
Thank you for that. Rumours are swirling that if there is a leadership spill, that Chris Bishop will replace Finance Minister Nicola Willis. Chris Bishop says he's best friends with Nicola Willis, but do tobacco lobbyists ever know what friendship is? Et tu, Bush? Stabby, stabby, and the backy, backy? Your thoughts?
The issue there is that National always does best when in its leadership and its deputy leadership, both its wings, its Liberal, largely Auckland wing, and its more conservative wing are both united. So you have people, combinations like John Key and Bill English. The difficulty is that if Chris Bishop were to become leader of the party, well, he's from Wellington, so the deputy would have to be a Aucklander, just the way the party thinks. And it would obviously be Erica Stanford as the most popular of the ministers. That's 2 Liberals. So that means that the third ranking person and the next most powerful person would have to be from the Conservative wing. So that would sort of shut out Nicola Willis, who was also from the Liberal wing, and the candidate being speculated about, yes, would be Simeon Brown, another Aucklander, a competent minister in all the portfolios he's looked after, and would create that balance that National believes is very important in its leadership team.
The Finance Minister, Nicola Willis, says that the $14 billion in tax cuts were not borrowed, yet this government is projected to borrow $120 billion. Add to that the $2.9 billion for landlords, $300 million for tobacco, $200 million for gas and oil, and the extra billion for cancelling the IREX ferry contract. And core Crown net debt is reported now at about $180 billion, which is already well above the $120 billion previously budgeted for. If that is the harvest from the best finance minister New Zealand's ever going to have, what would bad look like?
Well, again, just on a technical point there, the government dollars don't sort of flow in an observable way. It's a bit like Labor's promise that if it introduces a capital gains tax, those dollars will somehow magically, go from landlords to GPs to pay for free GP visits. That's not how it works. So, in a way, it's a bit sterile to say that they borrowed for tax cuts, but it's certainly true that as a result of their tax cut package and their failure to substantially cut spending, despite their rhetoric, they have, I think, widened the operating deficit to more than it may have even been under Labor. So if you want to call that borrowing for tax cuts, they have done that. It's certainly true that the amount of borrowing by the government is as bad as it was under Labor and nearly as bad as it was under Bill English. They haven't got on top of that. There's a structural deficit. There's no surpluses forecast ever on the old measure. There's one tiny surplus, I think 4 years' time under their new, more creative accounting measure. So, yeah, they've got a serious problem on the fiscal front, which is different from the economic front. And, of course, they aren't entirely to blame for the depth of this recession. There are a whole lot of other contributing factors, including the performance of the previous government, but they promised to fix things. They personally believed that their very election would so boost business confidence and consumer confidence that the economy would boom. Well, they were wrong about that. That's not how the finance world works. There is no, in the spreadsheets, there's no line called "I like the finance minister" or "I don't like the finance minister." The fact of their election did not on its own change the economic outlook, and that came as a real surprise to them.
The Prime Minister, Christopher Mark Luxon, told Radio New Zealand this week, and I quote, "There is absolutely no question that he will lead his party into the 2026 election." The Prime Minister says no question, so please, question away.
Well, that's the appropriate answer from the Prime Minister. Were the Prime Minister to answer in any other way, it would immediately spell the end of his leadership. So all leaders answer that question in that way.
Selling public assets is as popular in the electorate as Trump is at a trans folk vegan music festival, and allowing offshore millionaires to buy $5 million mansions doesn't seem like much of an economic vision. How will the government win hearts and minds in time for the election?
Well, again, just on a technical point there, I think Trump would be more unpopular at a trans convention than recycling of assets would be in New Zealand. John Key went to the public over that issue in 2011 and received a mandate for recycling 49% of the shares in his energy companies. The asset sales, even the way they were managed in the early days of the 80s and 90s, were not overwhelmingly unpopular. The governments which conducted those sales were re-elected after all, and nobody thinks that it would be a good idea to buy any of those assets back. So I think it's an overstated issue. There is some paranoia about it because of the management of that issue, of some of those trade sales in the 80s and 90s. But I just don't think, as Phil Goff found in 2011, that it is the number one. It has the power to move votes the way the Labour Party and some of the extreme left, such as yourself, think. I think the Labour Party came up with an excellent policy called Future Fund.
Yes.
I think it's something National should steal. I think they should put those shares into that future fund as Labor is proposing. I think they should do that before the election. And I think they should stipulate that the new fund cannot sell any of those shares until after the election. But after the election, it would be able to begin trading those shares on a day-to-day basis as it saw fit, which could mean buying more shares in those energy companies. It may well do that. But it would have a mandate, as I think the Labor Party wants, to grow the amount of assets that the New Zealand government owns. And, the best way to do that is to put those assets under professional management so that decisions can be made about what asset profile is the best to increase if you want to call it the family silver, you can, but I think that's a bad analogy because I think some of those assets are like the family silver, unused, dusty, not being maximized. I think a better analogy might be that the Labor Party's future fund managers would decide, well, these particular shares in one of the energy companies just they seem overvalued. We're not getting what we need from them, so we'll sell them and we'll buy some shares in another New Zealand company, and so grow the nation's wealth, the government's wealth, in the way that I think is Chris Hipkins's vision. And it seems to me that we now have a consensus on KiwiSaver, which is a fantastic achievement. When we argue over capital gains taxes, it's really only where the line will be drawn on the bright line test. And it seems to me there is a bipartisan consensus over something like the future fund, if it allowed for greater dynamism than what Labor's announced so far. I think everyone knows that over time the future fund would become more dynamic, but I think to get it established, to keep faith with Labor and to say, look, we won't allow the future fund to start trading those shares until that's been tested by an election. I think that'd be a fantastic way forward, and I don't think that the public would be against it in the way you suggest.
Rumours are circulating that national backbench MPs are calling each other and numbers being taken on the leadership. As someone who has staged more leadership coups inside the National Party than anyone else in Christendom, what advice do you have for these backbench Turks?
Well, you have to be cautious when you change a sitting prime minister in particular. You have to be convinced that it will lead to the re-election of the government when that otherwise wouldn't happen. The difficulty they have now, and you're quite correct, that activity, those phone calls, those WhatsApp groups, those signal chats, they are all happening. But you have to be convinced, I think, firstly, that you will definitely lose the election with the incumbent, and that you have a much higher chance under a new candidate of winning. And the problem they have is that first condition is not yet established. Under most polls, the coalition would be re-elected. It would have a greater number of New Zealand First MPs, a few more acting MPs, and probably 8, 9, 10 fewer national MPs. So you can understand those 9 or 10 that think they're going to lose their seats are pretty keen to keep them, and they think that by changing the leadership they're more likely to keep their jobs. But I think they have to think the broader question is, if you're a National Party person, the most important thing is to keep the Labor Party and the Greens Te Pāti Māori out of power, especially if the Labor Party is moving further to the left with people like Michael Wood, Craig Rennie being selected for seats, talk of getting rid of the centrist finance spokesperson Barbara Edmonds for a more left-wing finance spokesperson after the election. So if you're a National Party person, this is terrible. And I think they do have a responsibility before they act against Christopher Luxon to convince themselves that they're not acting solely out of self-interest, but about the interests of the country as they perceive it. And I think they have to satisfy themselves that they do genuinely believe he cannot win in terms of forming a continued three-party coalition. If they do believe that, then they equally have an obligation to get rid of him. But that's the question they have to ask themselves. And if they do believe he cannot win, then they do have an obligation to get rid of him. And then only the question is whether somebody else would save more of those National Party seats. I think the answer to that is almost certainly yes.
Finally, Dr. Hooton, political predictions for 2026, please.
Well, I mean, you can't give a 100% assurance that we'll begin the year with the same Prime Minister or leader of the opposition, for that matter, as we have now.
Mm-hmm.
So it is all a bit unpredictable. I think one of the things the Prime Minister has said recently that is true is he has seemed to lift his performance since Sunday. His bullshit slogans about best country and planet Earth and putting more money in your back pocket, they've all seemed to have been put on the shelf and been replaced with a more sophisticated conversation. I mean, at least in his written speeches, he's clearly got someone writing better speeches for him. So it's difficult to say. But one of the things I think he said that's intelligent is that the coalition government being stable is a separate question than whether the party leaders in it are having a public scrap. And I think it is a sign of maturity if we can see that the leaders of New Zealand First, National and ACT will want to have a crack at one another. That makes entire sense. And that doesn't mean the government is destabilised. The important thing, I think, is that the government, as the Prime Minister said, is putting in place the things in the coalition agreements, and it continues to do that. You know, and I think Winston Peters' position on the regulatory standards bill is completely understandable, and even has a high degree of integrity. That's in the agreement. We will vote for it. It doesn't mean we like it, but we've agreed to it. We won't, take up the Labour Party publicity stunt of trying to repeal it before the election, because we promised we wouldn't. But if we get back in with many more New Zealand First MPs than there are ACT MPs, then we'll say, well, let's get rid of that ACT, and we'll see what National think.
Thank you, comrade. We'll talk to you again soon. Have a great time. Hooray.
And I think for the first time, we'll see an election campaign like that. Great.
Good.
Thanks.
Cheers. Hooray.